Hey guys, welcome back to the Black Ibis Social Club. I know we skipped a week. We were busy and a lot of stuff came up, and Fisto is traveling. He's actually traveling right now, but he managed to uh, join us from a strange back alley motel somewhere up north on the Canadian border. Um,
Yes, greetings from Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio.
right,
America's roller coast.
somehow his audio sounds better out of a motel room than it usually does at his regular house, but I don't know what's going on. Anyways, today we have a very special guest, somebody I'm personally excited for. We've got Dr. Zachary Porcu. Dr. Zachary Porcu is a historian, and he is author of the book Journey to Reality, which I'm holding right here. It's called Journey to Reality: Sacramental Life in the Secular Age, and he is the host of a new podcast called The Roots of Everything, which I highly recommend. I've shared it numerous times. But before I let Dr. Zach introduce himself, I want to kind of give a quick background on how I came across Dr. Zach's work. So recently, my wife started coming with me to church, to Orthodox church, and after being introduced to it, and I was praying and holding my fingers and like, please like it, please. And she decided right away that this is it. She realized that this is the right thing to do, and she spent a few weeks talking to our priest and decided to become a catechumen. For you secular guys that listen to the podcast, a catechumen is somebody that is joining the church. Dr. Zach can probably explain it better, but it's somebody that's going through the process of becoming part of the Orthodox Church. And so my wife joined, and also my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter. So part of the catechumen process is usually in churches is you attend classes, you read books to kind of learn about the faith and to learn about everything you need to know. And our priest, one of the books that we're using is Dr. Zach's book called Journey to Reality, and I read it. And I honestly, in my opinion, it is one of the best introductions to the Orthodox faith I've ever read. It's up, honestly, when it comes to religious books for really not theologically heavy readers. It's up there with Mere Christianity, and I actually like it better than Mere Christianity because of its kind of complex, simple explanations of very complex topics. It's honestly, I think it's going to go down as a masterpiece in the genre of religious writing. So, welcome, Dr. Zach. I'm so happy to have you on the show. Dr. Zach's mic's off.
Hmm.
I'm here.
I hope that doesn't mean. Oh, good. I
Thought we lost you.
I thought
I,
maybe.
I was
Yeah.
sorry about that. I said thank you. That's such a generous introduction. So happy to be on.
Right. Well, I'm so glad to have you on. And you wrote this book. And when did you write this book?
So I started writing this book during the time when I was a teaching fellow at the Catholic University of America during my doctoral program, and we were the teaching fellows are all assigned to teach the introduction to theology class to all incoming freshmen. So it's a really hard sell because all incoming freshmen have to take an intro to theology course and they have to get told all of this doctrine. But you can tell people doctrine and you can tell them the what. But if you don't tell them why that they should care, then inevitably they won't. So I started writing these little kind of short articles, is what I called them at the time, for different things. And then over the course of 5 years of teaching this course and revising them, I had a book on my hands.
All right, an excellent book. And what I love about the book is that you really capture orthodoxy. I guess the spirit of orthodoxy. This sounds kind of corny, but because what a lot of people have a hard time. Well, first of all, the opening line of the book is one of my favorite lines. It's Christianity did not start with a book. Right? That's the first line. And I love that. It did not start with a book. We're not reading a book and we're not following rules written down in a book. Christianity started with Christ, a person. And your book does a fantastic job of explaining that orthodoxy is not a set of rules to follow, but a complete way to see the world, to live in the world. And you do a really good job. And I think the key is that when you become Orthodox, you start living in a sacred world. Like everything, the way you look at the world should be in a sacred state of mind versus the secular that we were coming in from. And that right there is such a key because we're not when we go to catechism classes, we're not telling people like these are the rules you should follow. No, no, no. We're trying to get people to see the world completely different with new eyes. Would you say that's some accurate or?
Yeah, I mean, it's not enough to just give people lists of facts. You really have to change your imaginative framework for how you even see reality.
All right. Fista, did you read the book?
Yes, I did. I finished it just the other day on my flight to Cleveland, Ohio. Um, yeah, Dr. Zach, he mentions C.S. Lewis quite often in his Mere Christianity book, which I read many, many, many years ago, and I think many of our listeners will have also has read at some point in their lives. And in a lot of ways, the highest praise I can give the book is that this is very much an update of that kind of apologetics. And what I liked about it very much, so teaching this year, I guess I sort of personally came across the notion of a sacramental life, having, taught about Roman history and Byzantine history and the rise of the Christian church. And I'm looking at it going, holy crap, this stuff's a little, this stuff's a little wild. Like, and you kind of realize that like, oh my God, it is true. And this book does a really good job of answering the question just how bad our situation currently is. The divide or the explanation of the sacramental versus the secular world and how we got to the secular world, I think is very well said. And it is also personally useful to me because this is a question I've been desperately trying to figure out, especially within the context of being a husband and a high school teacher. It's just like, God, people really don't know how bad it is. Just really how bad it is. It's hard to find the words to explain the problem, which is important if you hope to figure out the solution.
Right. And I think your podcast that you started just recently, right, called "The Roots of Everything," which is which is a great name, by the way. It's really supplementary to the book, and for listeners, the podcast so far has focused on the history of secularism from the perspective of Dr. Zach, which is an Orthodox perspective, and he goes in depth about different political elements, like for example, the idea that fascism, communism, and liberal democracy are both fully secular modes, and they're completely tied into the secularization of the world. You just recently did one on, you're not done with it yet, on technology, and that it's so out there and it goes so deep, and I'm listening to it and I'm just like, I got to pull over while I'm driving because it's so good. I need to like listen attentively. But yeah, so what's interesting is that you are a convert to Orthodoxy, right? Do you mind telling us a little bit about what brought you into Orthodoxy? I'm kind of interested in that.
Yeah, I was majoring in philosophy in undergraduate, and we had a really great, I was at a Baptist school, I should say, and we had just a really great chair of the philosophy department who Dr. Scott Key, and he's a Baptist, and just hilariously, so many people at my Baptist school became Orthodox because of him, because he had us read the church fathers and he had us read history. And he was, I talk a lot about ancient, medieval, and modern ways of viewing the world and blah, blah. I first heard that in his class. And we learned how to think in terms of the ideas that influenced these historical periods. And so when you start thinking that way, you start accepting this idea that, well, there's a different imagination that people had for how to view the world in each of these eras. And then, we're reading the early church fathers, we read Athanasius, and then you start thinking to yourself like, oh, these guys are saying pretty explicit things about sacraments and bishops, and we know historically that they are the disciples of the apostles. So that kind of gets you paying attention. And then there was this other history professor at the school, a guest lecturer I think, this Professor Trenum person who was teaching California history. And a lot of my friends were in his class, and we heard, oh, well, he has a church, and it's this Orthodox church. What is this? So some of my friends started going there, and I was roped in to attending, and it was all very strange, but interesting. And I think, one thing just kind of leads to another. And a huge element in that too was, my wife and I, or my girlfriend at the time, we wanted to get married, but we were like, well, what religion are we? And we had sort of been part of various campus Bible studies and things like that. But then you have to ask this real question. Well, what is religion? Are all these just the same? And then you're reading these historical texts saying something very much the opposite. And so eventually, we got baptized. And so many of our friends did too. This is the funny thing, is that a bunch of us, a huge group of our college group of friends, just like all got baptized in mass together, which freaked all our parents out because, they're baby boomers, and they're like, oh no, it's a religious cult. Our children are falling into a cult. And probably didn't help that I was like, yeah, it's the cult of the saints.
Well, that's amazing. For listeners, I keep on saying for listeners. So when you said Professor Trenum, that is actually Father Josiah Trenum, correct?
That's right.
And he is kind of famous in the online Orthodoxy world. He has his own podcast. He's out of California. I think he does almost like a daily thing, and he's written several books. And his church does the patristic nectar. Am I right on that, Dr. Zach? And he's kind of a big deal. I think he's personally probably brought in tons of people to Orthodoxy through his efforts and his different podcasts and appearances. I think he was on some documentary for a while ago, if I remember right. And it's really interesting because it's in the heart of Southern California where he's based. I used to live very close to where his church is, and I never got a chance to go, unfortunately, because it was during COVID when I was last in California, and it was kind of rough for me to get out there down in Riverside. But that's fascinating, and it's so heartwarming and just amazing that you say that you and a bunch of friends, that's such a fantastic thing, to hear from somebody. For you, Dr. Zach, and Fist already knows, I was born and baptized Orthodox. I was born in Eastern Europe. I'm Romanian. I did not stay in the church when I moved to the United States, but I was baptized, and then I recently returned to being an active participant in the faith, in the last few years, and brought my American family into it. And I'm really, really excited that, I'm kind of like rediscovering everything from an American perspective, because I used to put the church in this European, like back there kind of world, and here am I, and I go to a OCA church, right, which is the Orthodox Church in America, which is the same, I believe, Father Josiah Tremon is also part of the OCA, correct?
No, we're Antiochian.
You're Antiochian, okay. But it's American churches, it's American Orthodoxy, and the majority of people are Americans, at least in my parish. And I like that because I think that one of the thing that scares people away from Orthodoxy is they imagine they're going to walk into the church and it's going to be a bunch of old Greek ladies or a bunch of Russian ladies, We have those, right? But it's not just that. I would say that like 90% of our church is American, and and it even has like a southern vibe to it. And I've been to churches around me that also have kind of a southern flair to it. So I'm actually interested in going to a California Orthodox church. Even though I did go to one in Ventura County, I attended a few liturgies there, but it was a Greek Orthodox church, and that was pretty Greek. But that's a great story, Dr. Zach. And you're a Protestant before, right?
It's yeah, I guess. I mean, well, yes. If you say I'm not sure, then the answer is yes. You were
You're
a
like a
Protestant.
default Protestant, right?
Kind of. It's well, it's a little weird because I'm Italian American actually. A lot of
Okay.
people think I'm Romanian because of the U.
Because your last name,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, well, it's Romanians actually stop me at conferences. Sometimes this happened. A bunch of them grab me. They're like, "You are Romanian."
I looked it
uh,
up too. Honestly, I thought you were Romanian when I first saw the your name on the book, and I was like, let me look this up real fast. And I saw that you were Italian, but I mean, languages are very similar.
well, the Southern Italian specifically, we have these kind of U endings in the
Right.
name. Anyway, so my being Italian American means for in large part, everybody's Catholic and no one goes to mass. And so the that caused my father's generation to kind of become born again Christians, and then they did that whole evangelical thing, and then that's where my dad met my mother, and then they got burned out with that, and then they didn't go to church for a while. And then when my brother and I were getting older, they were like, the boys need to go to church. So they found this tiny little Presbyterian church with like 175-year-old ladies in it. And that was our church for, our whole childhood. But we didn't know anything about Presbyterianism. And I bring up the Catholicism because I think my dad's kind of religious mindset was very colored by Catholicism, by Tolkien, by some of this more enchanted kind of what you might call superstitious thinking that's more basic to like Italian American type of thing. But we grew up in a Protestant church, but we didn't know any of the Protestant doctrine. So yeah, kind of a typical American story, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds pretty similar to mine. I was baptized Roman Catholic because my Italian or sorry, Italian. my Irish American grandmother,
Same,
that's
same.
that's what she did. That's what she yeah, same. That's funny. Um that's what she
Don't
did,
tell that
right?
to them.
Yeah, right. Shh, don't tell anyone. Um as long as you don't call me English. But anyway, just kidding. But no, yeah, Roman Catholic because that's what you do. And then my parents stopped going to that, and then I joined a Protestant sect, a Protestant church. In my teenage years, got burned out of that on my going through college, and only recently have decided like, no, wait, yeah, no, actually, Christianity is pretty great. Um, and I figure whatever church I end up joining, it's either going to be Roman Catholic or I'm going to convert to Orthodoxy. So it's just a matter of finding out which way I'm supposed to go. But
Oh,
we'll
so
find out.
you're in the middle of it right now.
I'm
He's
very curious. Yes, I'm ortho curious at the moment,
he's a he's
if
a
you will.
he's a ortho curious individual, you
But
know.
but yeah, it's fun though because like from the historical perspective, I look at both of those and like what you guys were saying about how it's just like when you read the early church fathers, it's like oh holy smokes, yeah
Right.
that's how I feel studying history. I look like oh my god, these really are it. Oh man, cool. So anyway, so we'll see. But there's a Orthodox church not too far from where I live, that looks like it's going to be pretty cool. So I've reached out to them. So I'm just gonna, you know, see what the deal is once the time comes.
It's
But
gonna
anyway,
mosey on down.
mosey on over, be like, hey guys, what's up? So we'll
All
see.
right. What's interesting is I think that I'm 40 years old. I'm actually 42, guys. I'm not lying. Okay. Anyways, but I I grew up in California in the 90s, which is, I would say, the peak of the Pax Americana, American Empire. And I always found it, there was an emptiness to it. I had this yearning for something more. And I, you know, read everything. I read everything, tried to absorb everything, and I was constantly searching for something. And that little space in, I guess, in my intellect or my spirit, that was yearning for something. Sometimes it would fill up with all kinds of angry nonsense and negative things that did not feel well. I flirted with atheism and a lot of other stuff like that. And it wasn't until my trips through to Afghanistan when I was with the Marines for a while that I started realizing that there's a spiritual element. I kind of scratched the surface of this, that there's something sacred out there, that there's something there. I kind of encountered the problem of evil and the problem of good on my own through, visual and lived experience. And I explored the different varieties of Protestantism, and it kind of left me empty, and it kind of left me nowhere. And but for some reason, I always put Orthodoxy in this like box that I put in a box and I closed it and I put it away. I was like, no, I didn't even think about it. It's like it just doesn't exist in America. It's just something that my babushka does back home or something like that. And I was actually, I will tell people this, right? I was actually flying across the Pacific, and I was sitting in the back of a C-130, which is, if you've ever experienced it, it doesn't really have seats. It has like cargo in the back and like netting, and you kind of like lay on this netting, and it's the most unsafe thing. And there's like wires dangling and emergency lights blinking because the things are falling apart constantly. And I was reading for the second time in my life. I was reading Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, and I was just getting towards the end, and I'm reading the parts about Alyosha, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm just like, we're hundreds of miles above the ocean. Thing is rattling, you can't hear anything, and we lost Vista. He'll be back though. He just sent me a message. He had a computer crash. Anyways, I'm flying above the ocean, and I'm reading this book, and I had like a moment, like just tears streaming down my lines. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but it was the funeral scene when Alyosha is there with the little kids and the boy dies, and he's giving the speech, and I'm just like crying. I'm like, oh, I'm crying, like in the back of this C-130, and like I've got all these guys with guns sitting next to me, and I was sitting there like a grown man, just like reading a book on my Kindle, like tears coming down my eyes, trying to kind of hide it so I don't look like a crazy person. And it was like a flash of realization that like, why don't I go? I've been searching for so long. Why don't I go to an Orthodox church? Like, why did I, And I remember I landed in where I was going. I was going to Malaysia, and I got on the internet, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's an author, and he started going to a Russian Orthodox church. He became a convert, and he actually goes to the one in Pittsburgh, the one that does the podcast. What's that podcast called? Ancient Faith. Podcast out of Pittsburgh, which your podcast is tied to it too, right?
Yeah, my podcast and my book are both published by Ancient Faith.
Right. So he attends that church in Pittsburgh, and I was like, yeah, I should do it. I should do it too, And I get back home and I find the nearest Orthodox church and I start going. And then of course COVID happens, and then I get sent out again, and then my career changes, and I change careers, and I find myself in South Carolina, and I finally found the church, through a bunch of weird kind of circumstances. I ended up walking through the door, and it's the greatest thing I've ever did, and I brought my wife and daughter in right away without forcing them. I was like, hey, why don't you guys come and check this out? I've been going for a few weeks. And my wife is like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for also, and nice. Here I am again, into it now, which is really fantastic. But, I think there is in our world right now, there is an emptiness in the West. There is a spiritual emptiness. There's secularism has like reached its apex, in my opinion. Like that, we've reached a level of like all the promises that were given to us from a secular perspective, which is material well-being, happiness, pleasure. They've all proven to be empty. Our country has reached its peak, and now we're kind of seeing like the boomer generation got everything and wanted, but they're not happy. They're miserable. They're on the downslide, and it's not a happy ending for them. It's not a pleasant ending for so many of them. And all the promises, whether it's like the sexual revolution, feminism, all this stuff has not yielded anything good. Instead, it's yielded, divorces, broken families, addictions, sadness, and just overall misery, And I think so many people are searching for something, for stuff, and hopefully they find the truth, which I know I found. And I think the kind of work you do is exactly what we need today. It's exactly what we need today. You know what I mean?
I mean, that's why I wrote it, because I think that you can't see. You've listened to the podcast, so I take a very broad view of secularism and even of liberalism, in which just everything we do is secular, liberal democracy, whatever, but all of it's secular. Liberalism, secular; conservative, secular; fascism, communism. It's all secularism, and it all leads to misery, because part of the project's core of secularism is to reject the spiritual dimension to life in very explicit terms, almost like kind of an intellectual crusade against the idea that there are immaterial things, that there's such a thing as an absolute good, stuff like that. Little things that everyone has believed in every civilization and all of human history.
Until yesterday, yeah.
And so until yesterday, historically speaking, for sure. And then, that no wonder everyone's miserable. It's like we have all the technology, we have all the goods, but we have what experts are calling a mental health crisis. I mean, why is that the case? And so we can't just tell people the doctrinal points. We have to really reawaken people's imaginations to something bigger than the ultimately very narrow perspective of these post-Enlightenment ideologies.
Right. Well, it's interesting because if you follow the internet, right, on the interwebs, one of the big discussions, this is one we've had, Fisto and I have had it almost with every single guest, which is, and you know what I'm going to say, which is the problem of young men. And there is a very, there's a cadre, there's a subgroup of young men that are very lost, and they want answers, and they want solutions, whether they become the ortho bros that we all know about and they try to, start reading about orthodoxy, or they get into like neo-pagan type of stuff, or into some dark paths and try to revive or at least role play as 20th century secular governments from Europe. You tend to get that kind of stuff. And one of the things I notice in this conversation, and I've been getting into it on Twitter, on X a lot, which I need to delete X because it's brain rot and needs to go away. But what I've noticed, and especially after reading your book, and I've been thinking about this, is that they tend to have the frame wrong, right? They want, a lot of people just want a list of, this is what I need to do, and this is going to make my life better. I need to do these bullet points, right? And that's not the right answer. There is no list of this, right? And you kind of elaborate on this on your podcast and in the book itself, saying that like that kind of mindset is a very utopian mindset, and utopianism itself is a secular concept. The idea of making the world better is a secular utopian ideal. There is no list of making the world better. What you have to do is you have to change the frame and adopt a sacramental view of the universe, of the world, and live that way. You have to participate, and that is a very, very like radical viewpoint in our secular age, because Americans, for example, are very neurotic. Like it's hard for and you can probably attest to this. You guys are both Americans. My wife is a great example of it. You know, when she first got into the church, she wanted like, okay, so what do I do? Okay, she's like, I want a list. I want to walk in and tell me which icons to venerate and exactly like step by step, you know? And that's such a very American mindset, you know? In Orthodox, it's more like, yeah, you just kind of go in there and you do your thing, you light your candle, you know? You venerate the icons and eventually you'll get it. You know, it's not this like
Yeah, there's very little interest in allowing space and allowing time and allowing breath, allowing just relax for a second.
right,
Just
right,
be for a moment. It's fine. You don't
right,
have to run around screaming with your head cut off.
right.
Relax.
And I ask these young men, you know, who go, oh, you know, you're just a boomer, you know, you have a house and a wife, so you know, we're never going to get it, you know. And I posed a question, and I know Dave Green, you know, he's been kind of talking about this also, and he's a great podcaster. Um, the question is, right? Like, the problem is, it's like, what is your goal? What are you trying to achieve, right? Because there is no like spiritual maxing kind of concept. You know, this is not um, American Psycho kind of thing where you can follow a routine, you know, of like skincare and exercise and hydration. And if you're going to drink these many waters a day and you're going to do 100 sit-ups and blah, 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 and you're going to be happy, because that's not how happiness works. That's not how joy works. And that's not how the spiritual plane works. There isn't a spiritual plane. It is united with the physical plane. Uh, and the question is, you look at the boomers, and yes, they have their houses, their boats, their Florida trips, and their you know their retirements, but they're not happy, right?
No.
So if I'm going to give you a list of all these, how to attain these things, how to, you know, boomer max or whatever, you're just going to end up where the boomers are, which is unhappy. So there's no actual solution along those lines. What you need to do is you need to radically change your entire perspective on life and the spiritual, and accept what's secular and realize what is sacramental, and kind of approach that from that. And what I like about your book is that it really focuses on the idea of participation, right? You know, your later chapters in the book really go into, you just need to go and do this. This is why you need to participate in the sacraments, because it's about participation. It's not about just reading on the internet, or, you know, you need to go and do. Does that make sense, Fisto and Dr. Zach?
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Making
it's,
sense.
and I guess I would nuance it a little bit more, because the problem for these utopian secular lifestyles is the assumption that the world is mechanistic, and that the human is also somehow mechanistic, like a machine. And therefore, the problem of the individual person and the person's happiness, as well as the problem of society and how do we arrange things so everybody's happy and how do we make everything right, is that there's this idea. Part of what the utopian idea means is the belief that reality is this problem, or this series of complex problems that needs to be solved, and that you can arrive therefore at these engineering solutions or equations or algorithms or the exact calculus for how to do this. And once you solve the problem of life, then everyone will be happy forever and well adjusted, and there'll be prosperity, and it'll be the end of history, and all this stuff. And I've been suggesting on my podcast in the last few series that this is utopian and it's not achievable, but not because it's like the problem's too difficult to solve or something like that. It's just too complex a problem no one can solve. It's like, no, reality is not a problem to be solved. It's and that's what I mean by participation, is that reality is totally different than that. Reality means, like, when you're sitting in a lawn chair at the park and you're watching your kids and your dogs or whatever run around, and the sunlight is just right and the breeze is just right, and you take a deep breath and you're not thinking about anything, and your mind just goes blank, and you can be fully present, then you have this experience of reality. A lot of people call this mindfulness or light trance meditation, I think is what the Buddhists call it. Like, you just are there, and then you realize that reality is not a problem to be solved. It's just you are, and God is. And that sounds a little hokey maybe from this mechanistic neurotic perspective, but
Well, I
there
think
is
it.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it speaks to the immaturity of the secular worldview. When we started going down those lines, yeah, in great strides when it comes to physical sciences and engineering, and the world has made some incredible wonders for sure, but we did it without realizing that it made us very, very, very stupid in some very significant ways. And like what you're describing, oh, it sounds a little hokey. Well, I think it maybe only sounds hokey to those who have not participated in that kind of thing. I was thinking about the drive that I took to Cedar Point today. One of my favorite things growing up was driving from my hometown on the west side of Cleveland, and you basically take Route 6 along Lake Erie the whole way. And it's just this really pleasant drive. It is one of my favorite things. And I got to do it again for, decades. And I'm sitting there with my wife in the car and she's driving. And I looked over at her and I was like, I could do this forever. I could just drive like this forever and never stop. And it's that same kind of thing. So, oh, does that sound hokey or cheesy? Or, oh, Fistel's trying to get poetical again? No, 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 no. You have the maturity to understand what I'm talking about. Like, you guys get what I mean, right? I could
Right.
sit there and drive forever and it would just be heaven. You guys understand what I mean by that. It's because there's a more mature understanding of reality. I agree with you, Dr. Zach, that reality is not a problem to be solved. That's an insanely immature viewpoint on reality. No, no, no. Reality is something to be experienced, and you're not going to totally understand it because you're incapable of totally understanding it, but it's going to be pretty freaking sweet anyway.
Well, I don't know what I would say about immaturity, but I would say, because maybe, but
Sure.
I'm trying to pin down exactly what the issue is, and that's why I always go back to this imaginative framework thing, because
Mm-hmm.
if reality is a problem that needs to be solved, then everything is always a means to an end. It's very this mechanistic thinking, and when you're describing this
Right.
drive, what you're really describing is not something. It's not a means to any end, because
Correct.
you're like, oh,
I'm
driving is a
just
means to an
cruising.
end. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm cruising.
yeah, but you're just cruising, and cruising, you're doing something meditative,
Mm,
almost something worshipful, where like
yeah,
worship is this state of being in line with reality because it's good. Like
right.
there's just this unqualified sense of the good, and you can participate in the good kind of just
Yeah.
by participating in being, because it's not a means to any end. It just is.
The
And the
thing itself is
mechanistic
good.
thing,
Yeah.
yeah, and the problem with there's many problems with the mechanistic view of reality, but one of them is that you don't actually have the ability to stop anywhere and say, well, it's just good. It's like, okay, well, then everyone will have enough to eat. It's like, why is that good? Uh, well, then people won't be hungry. Well, why does that matter? Like, there's nowhere in the mechanistic thinking actually for moral judgments, because then you'd have to settle on, well, because it's good, period, full stop, in this moral, cosmic, ultimate sense. And that isn't, if you get there, then there is no problem to be solved. There is no mechanistic input output.
Yeah. What would you say might be a better word than immature to describe the problem I was trying to describe?
It might be immaturity in
Maybe
one
incomplete?
sense. Well, it's at least disoriented, like it's
Hmm.
misaligned. Like,
Right.
what are
Okay.
you aligning yourself toward? And
So,
it's like,
okay,
well,
disorient. Hmm. I like that. I like that. Okay.
and I like orient too, because you can do this double meaning where orient means east, and Christ is the true orient, is the language of the fathers. So to be
Right.
reoriented, like, it has this sense of like being aligned to
Oh,
Christ.
Right.
I like that. Okay,
Because
cool. Yeah.
he's
Well,
the orient from on high is how we describe him in the hymnography.
well, and I think that's such a great way of looking at the modern problems is disorientation, because so much of the pursuits that we put, and when I say we, I mean Western culture, American culture, that we put up high as our primary objectives are very disoriented. Like the love of the finance maxing or the workout maxing and all this kind of stuff, which in a way leaves people unhappy because it is not properly oriented. In a way, you have people that spend every waking moment of their lives playing video games and like mastering some Call of Duty or something like that. And video games aren't bad. There's nothing wrong with video games. I enjoy video games. But when your entire life becomes oriented around that and that becomes your sense of purpose, it's going to leave you unhappy because it's disoriented. It's not connected to the greater truth or the greater, to Christ or to anything. And you see that a lot with people, that are like, well, you need to finance max, bro, and like get all your Bitcoins and stuff, or you get all this stuff and then you'll be able to buy stuff. And those people never end up truly happy because it's the next Andrew Tate that comes along. It's like, oh, I need more girlfriends or more Lamborghinis or more something like that. And it's just that we live in a state of frustrated unhappiness in our work, for example, because our work lives are not oriented. It's about like, attending the most meetings and getting the best promotions and that kind of stuff. And it's never ending. It's never ending because there, like you said, there is no point where you go, is this good? Have I reached a point where it's good? Can I stop? And because there's no orientation, you don't know where to stop and you don't know where to get off the ride. It's kind of a self-perpetuating kind of black hole that you get sucked into.
And it's interesting because it's not, there's this hint in a lot of writers that, and in the church fathers, that the age to come is also going to be this sort of never-ending pursuit of the depths of God, of God's being, or something like that, that cannot be exhausted. And so I think that kind of like worldly maxing that you're talking about, it kind of reminds me of this sort of corrupted earthly version of the real desire that we have to go from glory to glory, like Paul says. I don't know if you guys like Tolkien, but there's this beautiful poem that he wrote, Mythopoeia. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
It's that English guy, right? He wrote some books that were pretty good.
Yes. But he wrote a lot of things that we're only kind of now coming to find out, a lot of interesting poetry. Anyway, it ends with this vision of heaven, actually. And he makes this, he's talking about how authors and storytellers will be participating in kind of this infinite act of continuing to tell new beautiful stories even in heaven. And the line is, be sure they still will make, not being dead, and poets shall have flames upon their head, reference to Pentecost, and harps whereon their faultless fingers fall, there each shall choose forever from the all. Meaning, we'll each get to continually choose new, beautiful, good things out of the all, which is Christ, the Logos. And so that works because he who is inexhaustible. But when you misalign that to worldly things or to yourself, obviously our world is not Christ. It's not inexhaustible. We exhaust it every day,
That's a beautiful poem. And that's for us on the podcast, which we tend to focus a lot on literature and writing and, the act of creation, that is important because we have to realize that we write, we paint, we create art. It has to be oriented, east towards Christ. If we orient ourselves towards, financial well-being or towards attaining worldly acclaim, we end up with a lot of negativity, which is, you see in the literature circles of the different political, nonsense going on and the different like being banned from this or that, or, the big conversations in the lit world right now, because, the focus tends to be on like, okay, I need to get the acclaim. I need to be recognized. But that's the wrong focus. The real focus should be you're creating in the mode of facing east, right? And at least that's how I look at it.
Yes, yes. Because where is it going? Like, why are you doing anything? What is the aim? And Aristotle says, if you look at anything, you're going to ask yourself, well, what is this for? And then, there'll be some answer. It's like, well, why am I making a saddle? It's like, well, the saddle is for riding a horse. Okay, well, what's riding a horse for? Well, it's for going to war. Okay, well, what's going to war for? Well, it's for protecting and you can go on and on and on. And his point is that eventually you have to come to this point where you stop and you can't say anything beyond it. Say, well, protecting my family. Why? Because it's good to protect your family. Why? Because, and then you kind of get to this point where like, well, family is good.
Right.
And he said, when you get to that point, you know what the good is, because the good is that which is good in itself, not for the means of something else.
All right. So, kind of on this topic, the problem of young men, right? You are a catechist, right? So you help educate people into the church. Can you actually explain for our non-Orthodox or secular kind of listeners what a catechist is, and real quick?
Yeah, catechism is just basically we make everyone who wants to join the church go through all these classes and numbers of. You should attend a whole year of liturgical participation so you can see all the fasts and feasts of the church. You need to learn the rhythm of the church. We give you reading list, we give you lectures, we give you all this kind of stuff because we need you to know what you're getting yourself into in our goofy cult, and so you don't have any bad idea about what this actually constitutes. We want to make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into.
So let's say, you come across, you're sitting in church or in just anywhere in life, and you come across a young man in his early 20s who's angry with the world. He's like, I'm angry. Everything sucks. I'm a white guy and I've been shut out of all the colleges I want to go to. I'm very angry and I've discovered this orthodoxy thing online. I'm interested in it, but I don't know, man. There's just a bunch of old Greek ladies and I really want something. I need some help, I mean, what do you tell those people, who have legitimate gripes about the state of things? How do you get them into, onto the right path away from self-destruction and that kind of stuff? What would you say to those guys?
Yeah, it's a good question. I thought you were going to ask me something different because everybody is, I don't know. There's so much pearl clutching that happens when people are like, oh, young men are doing something.
Right.
We have such a bizarre feminized society that in a bad way, like toxic femininity, that's maybe causing or reacting to toxic masculinity or whatever. I hate these terms, by the way, just for the record.
I do too.
But
they're trash. They're bad.
They're bad, but I try to speak the language of the people.
That's fair.
It has cachet. It's like people know what I'm talking about, and it's like the answer is everything's toxic because everybody's, the human person has been completely undermined and had the rug pulled out from under it. So, I'm glad to hear this kind of question, which is how do we work with the energy that's there, not how do we protect ourselves from the testosterone. God forbid, we have boys do anything. And I also think that we're awful to women too. We're awful. We've engineered a society that is horribly oppressive to women and horribly oppressive to men.
Absolutely.
That's just, yeah. I just need to make all these prefaces because inevitably those concerns are part of this conversation about gender. Anyway, yes, great question about young men. I try to. Advice is always a personal, person to person matter, but what I want to do with these people is sort of tell them, yes, I think your gripes are legitimate. And I want to start by validating those gripes because you have to meet people at their pain. That's where we're at. Whatever is going on, you have to say, yes, you're in pain. I feel you. I get you. Your pain is valid. However, that doesn't mean that the other thing I always tell people is orthodoxy is not a means to any end. It's only the means to the good, to holiness, to communion with God, and to being, real. If you've read my book, I'm big on this reality language. And so to be in part of reality itself, that's your goal. Orthodoxy can't be the means for you to defeat your worldly enemies, and it can't be the solution to the engineering problem of modern society. Those are utopian quests. So I say, A, yes, your gripes are valid. Society is a disaster. But B, Orthodoxy is not going to solve that problem. It's going to do something way, way better than that, which is it's going to make you real. And then once you're real, nothing can destroy you. Nothing can defeat you.
Right. Okay. I like that. I like that a lot, actually, and, you're absolutely right, because a lot of times in our circles, we tend to focus on the, things are horrible for men, things are horrible for males, which is absolutely true, but it's equally bad for women. You see guys going on and on about like, oh, those online websites, dating websites, like, what's it called? Tinder or whatever. They're horrible for men, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, they're equally bad for women. It's the expectations on women are atrocious, like they're bad for everybody. They're just rot all around. And women need as much help as, as men do, because while the secular governments and institutions do tend to favor women, which is, I don't think that's a disputable fact, they're
It's pretty factual.
right. What they favor them with is not good. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Right. That what it gives them is freedom without responsibility, which is really a spiritual poison in a way, and it encourages some of the worst traits in people, which make them, in a way, slaves to the secular state. To this, I say state, but it's not really a political thing. Just the concept, right? And they don't end up well, because then they end up alone and sad and just as empty as the young spiritualless men. And that's the tough part, is because in my life, I work with a lot of young men and women, and a lot of them are lost. It's heartbreaking, talking to them and seeing, what they are, because they're lost, and they're yearning for something, and a lot of them unfortunately turn into, they go into either completely tune out and wrap themselves up in video games and kind of a disconnect from the world, and they kind of adopt on the surface harmless vices that end up turning into much worse vices. And then a lot of the women I've met just kind of go, oh, I'm just going to avoid everything and just kind of do my own thing. And what they end up doing is they don't they don't participate. That's what I'm seeing right now. I'm seeing a complete lack of participation in the world. They don't go places. They don't do things. They just kind of tune out completely, and they haven't tuned into anything else, and they're yearning for something. You know what I mean?
It's funny. Yeah, no, it's funny you're saying it like this. You keep hearing that. Well, as long as what you're doing makes you happy, then there's no problem with it. Well, I've yet to find a single person that was happy. So clearly that's not doing the trick.
Right. But happiness is not our goal. Okay. Happiness is kind of a meaningless word.
Exactly.
Right? What is happiness?
Even worse.
Right.
Even worse, even if you were happy. Congratulations, it's a lie.
What is happiness? Like, is it material gain? Is it like having all the cupcakes, pizza every day? Like, what, it's not, happiness as a goal towards life is not a good thing, I don't know, but it's such a tough thing, because, we do these podcasts and we write these books and we do all this stuff, and there's a lot of pushback in a way, like from people that are seeking help, because a lot of this stuff is hard. Going to church is hard, because a lot of these young guys, and I'm going to include myself in this, okay, because I've had this difficulty myself. Initially we get into our heads, okay, we're going to go to church, and I'm going to become based or whatever. I'm going to adopt all this cool stuff, and I'm going to everything's going to go good, and you get to church, and it's church. You know what I mean, right? It's a human establishment. You know, there's God is there in the liturgy. God is there, and you know it hits. But you know, after it's coffee hour, and there's a few old people, and there's a few young people, and there's all kinds of people, but they're humans, and they all have their own little scandals and their little fights, and they have their, you know, that kind of, and some of them are, you know, they're not all you know, these theological geniuses that are going to sit here and quote scripture at you, or the patristics, or you know, the desert fathers at you, or anything like that. They're just people that just want to go home for the day and like live normal lives, and you know, and that can be disappointing to people that are like, oh, like I want to get all into this 100%, you know. And we need to accept that being a participant in it is that we have to accept all of it, you know, and really just be there, just take part, you know, in the good and the bad, and like all of it. I remember when I was young, I was kind of a nerd. Well, I wasn't really a nerd, but I kind of had fantasies, you know. I had college fantasies. I was like, I'm gonna go to college, and I'm gonna get my degree in art, and I'm gonna be hanging out with a bunch of guys like Pablo Picasso and, you know, Monet, and those guys in 1920s Paris, and I'm gonna sit around a cafe, and like we're gonna talk about like cubism and all kinds of abstract concepts and philosophy, and it's gonna be like Tolkien's Inklings, and we're gonna sit around and smoke pipes and just all create art, you know. And you go to college, and it's just normal people that are boring, you know, for the most part. And it's just like, oh, okay, you know, and you get disappointed. And I think that kind of goes to a lot of people going to church, you know, they just, you know, we want, like, I want it now. I want to go in, and I want to go from like zero to being like a monastic, you know, and or being perfect, you know, and it's a journey, right? You know, it's a way. It takes time, and lots of people fall short. We fall short. We fall short every day, and everybody falls short, right? And it's all about participating, I think. I think just being there, loving each other and loving the people around you, and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of hard to get through to a lot of young people sometimes. It took me like 40 years to figure out, you know?
I think a big part of it is we have to demonstrate it. We have to show them, like, what's your advice? Well, do you like who I am? Do you like how I am? Do you like the friendship or the mentorship that we have? Yeah. Okay, well, do the stuff that I do. Read the stuff that I do. Look at the thing. Like, I got this way in a very particular way, sir. So if an idiot like me can get here, then someone like you can definitely get here too.
Right.
That's my high school
But it
teacher
also
coming
is
out. But anyway.
probably, and I don't know these people you're working with, but I assume that there's also a germ of this utopian thinking there too, right? It's like, okay, well, world sucks, so I'm going to find the solution. I found the solution. You showed up to church, and why would you be disappointed that it's a bunch of regular people? That's probably because you think you're better than regular people, maybe, or maybe you have these kind of esoteric standards. You think everything's going to be Doctor Strange, monks teaching you secret mystical things. It's like that's very appealing, and that does happen. But you know, the thing that I try to emphasize to people is if you're disappointed by it, then you're not aware of what's going on because you're not real. And this is what I think this is in the book too. I tell the catechumens this all the time, which is when you go into liturgy, what's actually happening, regardless of how beautiful your building is that there is this invisible dimension to the liturgy that includes the angels singing around the throne of God and the saints participating with you and the body of the God-man coming out in a chalice to you. And all of that is very real. And the fact that you can't hear the angels with the choir, and you can't see the cherubim circling the throne, and you can't perceive the burning fire in the chalice, it's all happening. That's real. You just can't see it. And the reason you can't see it is because you're not real. Or not real yet. You know, you have to attain to a higher level of reality. And so even the most mundane, like this is why I did the cover of the book this way. If you remember the cover of the book,
Right.
It has the chalice on it, and coming out of the chalice, my wife is a graphic designer. She made the cover of the book. And I said, you got to make the cup with this like smoke, like fire coming out, but the fire has to be like the whole universe. And that's what she made, because it's like all of reality is in this cup. That's what's really going on. And so what I try to encourage people to say is like, you're looking for something higher than where you're at, since you can't perceive it. Like, you don't actually need an elder to give you like visions and use this clairvoyance on you. You don't need that yet. You just need to do the regular stuff. But the reward of the regular stuff of praying truly, which you can do with no education, is actually getting a sense of some of these realities in your, friendly neighborhood liturgy.
Right.
I like how this kind of explanation can be boiled down into a very close to my heart internet slang. Church is boring. No, you.
Right. You.
I see. I'll add one. The I don't know how much you guys talked about video games. I've a long history with.
Bring it, son. Let's go.
The slang kind of saying when somebody says like skill issue, like they're complaining about the character. Oh, this character's weak, and it's like, no, skill issue, you're bad. And somebody was yelling about something, some negative comment on one of my YouTube videos, and he was basically saying like, oh, this is all fake, and blah blah blah. And somebody just replied with noose issue.
It's so true. It's so good.
And I was like, yeah, that's right. It is a noose issue. And like, I have the same noose issue, because I walk into a church and I'm like, I don't want to be in church. I'm tired. I need coffee. It's like, okay, you noose issue, you're the problem.
Right. No, it's true. So I'll do a little anecdote of my own recent church. So I moved to South Carolina, and my experience with Orthodoxy has been Eastern European. I was baptized in Bucharest in a big church. I went to a lot of churches when I was a little kid. My grandma took me to them, and they were, God bless her, she just recently passed away. And you go to these churches in Bucharest, and there's one that's like, oh, this church is like from 1500 years ago, and it's been standing here, and it survived communism. And you go to another church, and it's like the same story, and they have relics and stuff from the saints, and just these crazy historical like buildings, that have been there forever. And I got to South Carolina, and I discovered the local Orthodox church, and it's a mission church, right? St. James Orthodox Church. It's a mission church, as in they just started about 10 years ago. The group of parishioners that got together, and they got the blessing, and they started building the church. And the actual church itself is not built yet. They're using they bought a building, but we're in the process of building an actual church. And like from scratch,
yeah, we did this.
And a part of me, when I started like looking at their website, I was like, I don't know, I don't want to go to this like small church,
this lame mission parish.
Yeah, I'm like, this is lame. Ugh, I don't know. What is my godfather?
Probably don't even have a rock band.
Yeah, what is my godfather gonna say? And I am sad to say that I had those thoughts. And I ended up, one of my coworkers, a nurse I work with, she's like, oh, hey, you're Romanian? Are you Orthodox? I'm like, yeah, technically. She's like, oh, I was born Orthodox. I'm like, really? You're like from the South, you're from like North Carolina. She's like, yeah, my parents converted to Orthodoxy many years ago before I was born, and and we go to this great church here at St. James. And I'm like, okay, I knew about it because it was the one I've been avoiding to go because I'm a coward, right? But and now I had no choice, like I had no choice. She's like, no, you got to come. I'm like, okay, I'll go.
Yeah.
And
you got called out, brother.
I got called out, right? And God bless her, because like she brought my whole family into it, and her family is so amazing. But I went there, and I'm sitting there, and I pulled up, and I was like, oh, what if this is corny? What if it's nothing like my imagination of a church, what if it's not even like the ones in California, like the Greek ones I've gone to in California? And I walked in, and I felt like I got punched in the face. I'm not even like making this up, right? First of all, the building from the outside is just a boring building, but inside it's just they made it so beautiful, and it felt like I walked in and I attended my first liturgy there with them, and I I saw it beyond that building and be you know what I mean? The beauty was there, not in the physical like walls, but in everything inside, in the people, and the faith that was on display. And I sitting there and like choir, not probably not the best choir in Orthodox churches. God bless them, I love them. But I'm just like it just. I had tears in my eyes, right? Like the first time I was there, I was like, this is it, right? Like this is like where I belong. And I just felt like that, right? And it took so much for me to fight through this resistance because of my expectations and my like, I want everything to be perfect. I want to go, if I'm going to go back to religion, it needs to be perfect, And I finally broke through that, and it just, like I said, it was like a slap in the face. I was like, oh, I was looking at everything wrong. It's not about all that stuff. It's about participating, it's about, and I'm at the point now where like I look forward to church every Sunday. I'm like, I'm coming up with excuses to go to Vespers every several times a week, because I'm like, oh, I can change my work schedule around to make it in time and that kind of stuff, because I just love being part of that, and it's, I don't know, it's just a great, amazing experience, and it's hard to put into words for other people,
Yeah, and this is why ultimately I think we need to do. That's why I wrote the book, because I want to get at asking the real questions about our experience of these things. Because when you're doing I'll pick on you a little bit since you started picking on yourself, which is like when you're in that mode where you're like, this needs to meet my standards. It's kind of an objectification way of interacting with reality. There's like me, and then there's this thing that's coming across my desk, and I'm going to give it a grade or whatever. And that's not how reality actually works. You're a part of it. You can't exist as this detached thing on the outside. You have to. You're already inside of it. You're already a participant in everything. And so, what life is more about is about unfolding the things that you're already a participant in and finding their depths. In other words, it's sort of the opposite image of looking for the right religion or looking for the right parish if you're Orthodox, or you don't look for things and then say, oh, this one's bad, this one's good. I'm searching, and then when I find it, I'll be there. Like that again, that's very utopian. I think you're already a part of a whole universe with depths 99% of which you can't even perceive. And so you have to do this sort of unfolding of yourself and unfolding of all the context that you're already in. And your story is such a beautiful example of this, because you already had this coworker who was already going there, who you already had a relationship with, and then all that had to happen was that had to be just unfolded, and its depths were revealed to you as having already been present in your life.
Right. Right. And it's such a weird feeling when you actually like, it's like opening your eyes, It's like, oh, I was approaching things from a completely misaligned perspective.
The whole Christian life is
Yeah.
sort of a motion of doing this, of opening your eyes, sleepers awake.
Right, right. It's like Christ putting the mud, making eyes for the blind man, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it kind of reminds me another line from this Tolkien poem where it's like, great poem. I'll send it to you. He says, he's talking about human beings and man himself, and he says, disgraced he may be, yet not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship once he owned. Meaning, man is still this king of creation, and he's disgraced but not dethroned. And so that the royalty of being of a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve is still there. It's still imprinted on and part of who we are. And so we just kind of have to restore that, unfold it, reorient it back to he who is, and it's all there already. You're already the king and priest of creation. Your wife's already a queen of creation. So it's like We have it. We don't have to look for it. We just have to rise to the occasion, be reoriented, be restored, however you want to talk about it. Repentance, really.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it. I was thinking a lot about your last, I think it was the last chapter or maybe the chapter before, but talking about all of this in the framework of the world to come. And I think to myself, man, human history is amazing with all the horror, but all the triumph. And it's magical. It's this incredibly beautiful thing. And that's in a world that's fallen and broken. Holy smokes. Like we're kind of incredible despite, in my mind, it's like, man, this is how good we get even being horrible. Imagine once, in the world to come. Oh man, look out. Like this stuff is not even going to compare. We're going to be like Roman Empire what? Never never heard of that. Never heard of it. Like
and I know what you mean,
that
and
way.
I don't obviously claim to know anything but about that because I has not seen. But
Right, of course.
but I do imagine in my mind that
Yeah.
it will be something like waking up from a dream in which it's kind of like you remember sort of, and it's vague and it fades over time because then it's real life.
Well, death is like going to sleep. You just don't wake up.
Right. But you
Well,
do.
Perhaps.
well,
You
but
do.
you do.
You do.
Yeah. Yeah. What if you do?
We will.
If we don't
Wake up.
die, that'll be interesting.
I do want to change topics real quick. I mean, not topics real quick, but kind of in a general thing, but still focus on orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is inadvertently tied to Eastern Europe, to Greece, and it's kind of an alien kind of way of approaching Christ in the United States, which is a Protestant. Well, people say America is a Christian nation. I tend to disagree. It's a secular nation from the very beginning. But
Yeah, there's no evidence that it's explicitly Christian.
right. But Protestantism is, part of American culture and Orthodoxy for all its growth in the recent years. And then, I know that Orthodoxy is not new to America. It came to Alaska through the Russians, and even a few hours south of me, there is in the United States oldest settled city, which is St. Augustine. There is a Orthodox church that's been here since like 1600. So it's not new, but it's new to the landscape of, the more mainstream landscape. And one of the things, you get a lot of guys going like, well, I need to stick to traditions, and my American traditions are this. And how do we get over that? How do we make Orthodoxy an American thing? I mean, I know the answer is that it's true. That's the answer. It's true. But how do we answer those questions where, oh, it's like an alien thing, How do we get past that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. You're sort of asking a couple different things.
Right.
One is how do we overcome the foreignness, the perceived foreignness of Orthodoxy, and make it appealing to Americans? And then the other question is, well, what about people who are really attached to their American traditions?
Right.
And so that question is more like, okay, well, how do you baptize American traditions? Because the missionaries always showed up and baptized whatever the local culture was, Chinese, or Irish, pagan, whatever. They were like, hey, here's how you should reframe your things that you already believe to make them actually the gospel. And so I think there's a lot of promise for that, because if you look at America as basically a deistic nation, then you have a lot of starting material to say, like, yes, and there's the Trinity, and there's apostolic succession, and there's saints, and all this kind of stuff. And so I think there's obviously a lot of Christian-esque elements to our American mythology that can be easily baptized. And for the foreignness, I think that, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the person and the situation, but I think Americans have always had a deeply foreign interest. Like that's what the whole Theosophist movement was like, ooh, Asian stuff is Asian religion will give us the right answer to the cures for modernity's ills. And so they came up with all these ultimately
Maybe
dumb
maybe it's a,
interpretations of Buddhism and so forth.
maybe it's just another example of when a no you is appropriate. Like Americans have no right to call something weird when this country is the birthplace of Mormonism. Like, no, no, you don't get to call anybody weird when that's homegrown. Okay, just stop. Just
And
relax.
lots of other weird
Yeah, uh,
denominations and stuff come out of the
well,
U.S.
just back up the truck. Think of famous Americans. If you aren't weird, are you American? I mean, I'm from Ohio. Like, guys, we got no room to talk to Orthodox and be like, you guys are straight. Sir,
Well,
you're from Cleveland, Ohio. Stop it. Like, just knock it off.
well,
You know, I don't
yes,
know.
I think that's true, but I think in the evangelical context of the questions, like you deal with somebody who thinks that his way of life is normal, which kind of we all do, and then he said, "Well, this is like a Greek thing. This is a Russian thing. Like this is not an American thing." I think that's kind of the if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think
Right,
that's the
right, right.
concern. And
Yeah,
so I think what
sorry, go ahead.
I think
Go ahead.
I think you point to the American Saints first of all, because that's also very unknown to people. It's like, oh, Raphael of Brooklyn, or Herman of Alaska. Like we at St. John of San Francisco, I visited him, and his relics, his uncorrupt relics. Is like going to these places and seeing incorrupt relics is that'll do a number on you, on your plausibility structures, as we call them in philosophy. So I think pointing to the American Saints and also maybe drawing on a little bit of our kind of Catholic imagery is the sacramental parts of our Catholic imagery may help de-foreignize it to people who
Yeah,
think that Orthodoxy means Greek Orthodoxy or Russian Orthodoxy. It's like, no, there is American Orthodoxy.
yeah.
It's here.
I think just some education. I mean, hearing that the oldest Orthodox church is in St. Augustine in my adopted home state of Florida, I go, "Oh, cool. You know, now I want to go see it." You know, that's my
Yeah.
first reaction is, "Oh, well, let's go check this thing out then. Let's see what this is about, huh?" You know, it's just know what the truth is. Hey, it's actually been here a while. It's not nearly as foreign or weird or un-American as you imagine. I mean, come on, guys. This is America. Like everybody wants to come here. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Well,
let's go.
so we have a resurgence of, neo-paganism, and one of the interesting things about the whole neo-pagan thing, it really comes out of like the 60s, and it comes out of that kind of it's really a rejection of Protestantism more than like a desire to find like truth, for example. A lot of it comes out of that. And people say that like, oh, I'm secular. I'm a secular person, but then they'll do all kinds of non-secular things like say namaste after Buddha classes and yoga classes, and put little Buddhas in their house and talk about stuff like karma and all sorts of these like Eastern kind of spiritual religious kind of things, tarot cards and all these other things. And I think that does come out of a rejection of Protestantism, two out of a kind of a fatigue with true secularism or the emptiness of it. And it's interesting because in a way, a lot of Protestantism is it's I don't know how to say it. It's spiritually dull. There's a lack of it's very Starbucks kind of in like their churches and that type of thing.
Well, it's secular.
Right,
I mean, it's
secular, right?
literally
Yeah,
secular.
right.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the reasons why a lot of people are attracted to orthodoxy is because because it's true. But on its surface level, there's a lot of, to use the secularized term, there's a lot of spirituality, I'm doing like quotation marks, right? Which is like there is a discussion and a fully embracing the sacred world that secular churches don't. So I think a lot of people can almost understand a lot of the concepts in Orthodoxy because our world, while it became secular, it still kept these threads of the spiritual, and that people kind of followed and they brought it in. And I mean, that's where, like, for example, like where my wife came from. She was a Roman Catholic and then went through some Protestantism with her family. And then, she always said she was spiritual. She's like, I'm spiritual. I believe in things that are not, provable through logic and science and that kind of stuff. And it's her mindset, her way of viewing the world really fit into Orthodoxy because of that, I think. And I think that those are the kind of people that are ripe for being introduced to, the Orthodox Church, in my opinion, because they're searching for something, and everything they find is just not good enough. It's like cupcakes instead of an actual meal.
That makes sense to me. As much as we disparage and dislike the quote unquote neo-pagan structure, really that it's just the secular structure is collapsing, so people are resorting to the mean, and humans just kind of know that there is kind of a spiritual thing out there. So in a lot of ways, Orthodoxy is going to make a lot of sense to a lot of people because you recognize those things. It's not like the Protestant guy that's going to smack you with the Bible and try to cast out the devil. It's like, no.
Right.
You're just, you're looking at it incorrectly.
I love the neo-pagan movement. I think it's great. And I'll say why, which is that.
Yes, please.
Because I don't know. I did a lot of work in classics, reading Greek and Roman. So maybe I, have a,
I agree with you, by the way. So you don't have to defend yourself against me because I agree. I want to hear your reasons, but I agree with you also.
No, I think you guys will, because, and I'm prefacing this by saying I think I may have rose-colored glasses a little bit about paganism, but I'll tell you a story to kind of capture it, which is that we were in class one time and my Catholic professor was kind of in the pre-class chatter. He was saying something about how the whole of our country is just becoming pagan and so horrible. And I just blurted out, I don't know why I did this. I just blurted out and I said, "Pagan, I wish." And his head snapped around to look at me. He's like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Pagan." I said, "Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius, Plato, Cicero,
Augustus, let's go.
Bring him on. Let's go. I'd love to if we were
Constantine,
actually pagan.
he was pagan. He was pagan until he wasn't.
And so I think the pagans were so easy to evangelize because they already believed in the gods. They already believed in the concept of the arche that I talk about. Greek monotheism was a huge thing among Greek philosophers. They believed in reason and logos, and they believed in that there was a absolute moral reality. And you take a random secular person, they believe in none of those things. They believe the whole universe is some kind of a computer program or a giant clock, and that we're going to use engineering math brain to solve all the problems of human life. And what that looks like is endless hedonism. It's like, whoa, how do you work with something like that? That's just a disaster of presuppositions about the nature of reality. Whereas the pagan is ready to believe in the gospel because the gospel, from his perspective, is something like fixed paganism. It's paganism 2.0. It's the correct paganism, meaning the right relation to the absolute moral order of the universe, the right understanding of who the gods are, fallen demons, and the right understanding of what the arche is, Christ, the incarnate logos. So I'm very happy to work with people who have occult backgrounds and who have neo-pagan interests because they don't believe the secular materialist lie. It doesn't satisfy. They're looking for it. So they're already on the path. Whereas somebody who says, "I'm a Christian," and he's a 66 books, sola scriptura, the pagan gods are fake, it's true and correct because God said so, that person is very difficult to work with, in my experience, despite claiming to say, "No, I'm a Christian." It's like, yeah, but all your presuppositions are secular. You're very hard to talk to. Whereas somebody who believes in invisible spirits, I'm like, yes, I know who those invisible spirits are. Do you want to hear more?
Right. I agree with you. And, C.S. Lewis's, book, Surprised by Joy, I found it fascinating when I read it the first time.
Love that book.
he comes to Christianity through paganism, basically through his academic paganism, and through his love of the classics and European mythology. And you're right. It's exactly like you said. It's like they they might be pagan and they might be wrong, but they still are not secular, which is very difficult to approach.
Yeah.
And it's hard for people that are nominally Christian. Say, I'm a Christian, it's hard for us to tell them, oh man, you're actually quite secular when you think about it. All your ideas are very, very modern and very, very secular. And it's tough. You're right. The super Protestant is almost harder than a pagan. 100%. I fully agree. You've studied religion. Are you familiar with Mircea Eliade at all?
I'm not. Tell me about it.
So Mircea Eliade, I'm a hardcore disciple because I'm Romanian, but I think his work is fantastic. His book, I'm surprised you're not familiar with him, because his book, or your book, could be like a companion piece to one of his most famous works called The Sacred and the Profane. Mircea Eliade was a Romanian. He was a professor of comparative religion. He comes out of the interwar period of Romania. He was Orthodox, but he was that kind of weird interwar pagan kind of adjacent Orthodox thing going on. Flirted with fascism and that type of thing. After the communists took over, he was allied academically with some of the Iron Guard guys in Eastern Europe. And when the communists took over, he GTFO'd to eventually ended up in the United States. He was the head of religious studies at the University of Chicago, and I believe he passed away in 1983, the year I was born. But he wrote tons of books, and he specifically did anthropology on tribal religions and tribal mythology. But one of the books he wrote that's pretty entry level, I think everybody should read it. It's called The Sacred and the Profane: The Nature of Religion. And what he talks about in it, and he doesn't outright say that he is Orthodox, but everything about him is Orthodox because he's culturally Orthodox, because he's Romanian and he grew up, I believe his father was a priest. He talks about the desacralization of the world, and his stuff it reads very contemporary, because it goes along the lines of like what Jordan Peterson is discussing right now, and the disenchantment and reenchantment, the whole thing. But his kind of thesis is that there is a sacred world and a profane world, and we live in a profane world. It's translated as profane, but I think the proper word should be translated as secular. And he talks about basically that everybody up until the modern era lived in a sacred world where everything to ancient man was a sacred thing, and like there was no division between the two, like the fire, the lights, and there was sacred time, there were sacred spaces, there are sacred events, and they lived in outside of linear time in their rituals and their celebrations. It talks about the celebrations of the church, for example, or our liturgical calendar, how it is in actual time, but it's actually outside of time. It's just a fantastic way of looking at it, and it's a little bit more academic, but reading your book, I was like, man, this is exactly what I've been reading for the last 20 years, studying Mircea Eliade. And it's such an interesting way, because we do truly live in such a desacralized world that it's, for some of us, even that profess religion of any shape or form, right, cannot put it away, we're looking through these goggles that like need to fall off because everything is secular. And you're right. How do you get the people that just look at the world in such a mundane way to truly believe in miracles, and not miracles in the past, but miracles in the present, and then it's such a difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around from our contemporary perspective.
Yeah, I mean that I was gonna say that's a good question, but I think that's the question, and part of it is appreciating, I think, a couple dimensions to it. One is that nothing total secular materialism didn't work. It didn't last very long, and even at its height, I would argue that it really never took over the popular imagination totally. It's not like there were these centuries where everybody was just a complete mechanistic secular materialist. I mean, part when you look at the growth of the scientific revolution from its beginning all the way through modernity, technological and scientific progress was always paralleled by this constant upticks in occult interest and theosophism. And Newton was an alchemist and an occultist. So many of the great fathers of science were deeply interested in occult and esoteric things, and the Ring of Solomon and all this stuff. And so the idea that secularism somehow didn't have this opposite side of the coin of like deeply occult thinking and interest right on the other side of it is, I think, is to mischaracterize these periods. So like right after the Enlightenment, what happens? The Romantic era, which was just this huge emotionalized pushback, interest in the macabre, interest in death, interest in spiritualism. And so modern man, so that's the my first point, is that modern man never really became a secular materialist. We've just been trained to talk that way. And so all of our linguistic categories, subjective and objective and proof and bias and method, and even the way we talk about the human person in terms of mechanistic categories, like saying, oh, I don't have enough RAM to think about this right now. We have this machine paradigm for reality. That's how our language works. But everybody has all these weird beliefs that make no sense on a machine framework, and we never abandon those. People believe in karma, people believe in luck, people believe in love, and most conspicuously of all, people believe in the good. People believe in actual morality, and that is not reducible to a mechanistic secularized universe. It's
Right.
a moral statement about the invisible world. And so to answer your question, I think we need to attack these categories, these linguistic categories and these imaginative constructs, and show that they don't work. But what I like to do is show that not that people are wrong about the world, but that they actually already believe in all of these things. They just don't realize it. And when you start to take people's beliefs apart, you're like, but don't you believe in the good? And they're like, and then they find that they do. And you're like, well, like, because like good examples, like you get somebody who's like, well, morality is just evolved altruism and it has this survival benefit. And you're like, okay, that's nice. And then you talk to them about, I don't know, some kind of a liberal rights issue, women's fertility, reproductive rights, or gay rights or something. And then they're like, this is wrong. And this other thing is right. And you're like, and where is that coming from on your evolutionary biology view of morality? It looks like you already believe in absolute morality.
Right. Well, and I think that's what in a way, if it's very simple but very complex, which is what your book does a really good job of is the idea of reframing. It's like you're going, wait a second, we're going to move everything a little bit to the right, and we're going to show its spotlight in the things that are already there, but now you get to see them from a different perspective. And I think that's what we need. I think that's what we need culturally, like to be kind of slapped out of this, you're right, linguistic models that we've kind of tied ourselves up in, because it's there. If you look at the last, the 20th century, if you look at every work of art, like film, for example, or video games or anything, it's chock full of spiritual stuff. All right, none of the stuff. There's no film out there. I can't think of any movie that's just a very materialistic movie. That doesn't have love or, like valor or any of these higher ideals
Mm-hmm.
at its core. I'm currently watching a bunch of older movies with my daughter right now, and you watch these movies and they're from like the 80s and 70s and 80s and stuff, and they're very, they're very almost non-secular by today's standards, because there are about these like true things like love. So it's like it's there. You're absolutely right. It's absolutely there. All right, Dr. Zach, we are getting close to the end. I'm going to let you go because I know you're a busy guy. I do have one more quick question. Actually, I do have one note. I was listening to you on Ben Christensen's podcast, and you're talking how there's no cyberpunk that has any magical elements. And I'm going to point out that I was like, but how about Shadowrun? Are you familiar with Shadowrun?
You know, Shadowrun has been suggested to me just millions of times, and it's just not. I just haven't gotten around to it. So tell me how do I interact with this?
I mean, it's a tabletop role-playing game, and there's a bunch of video games for it. The tabletop role-playing game is not that great. I mean, it's good, but the world is actually very interesting. It's cyberpunk. It's just your run-of-the-mill cyberpunk game, world kind of, with like hackers and that type of thing. But in a world building kind of element, there was a reawakening of magic. The idea is that it's like in the sixth age, and magic existed in the past, and it kind of went away, and the world became technological. But there was like some kind of like I forgot what triggered it specifically, but a new age came in, and magic became reborn into the world, and some people humans turned into elves and goblins and orcs and stuff, and they called it like goblinization. So it's basically a setting where you have like hackers and street samurais and your typical like neuromancer kind of thing, but next to them you have like elves casting magic and like street mages and like shamans that like worship like New York sewer rats and that type of thing. I like the world.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's a great setting. The game itself is the tabletop game. I don't know if you're familiar with tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of stuff.
We actually made one put it up on Kickstarter a few years ago. It went really well.
Okay, well then you are in the Fellowship of the Dice, with me. Unfortunately, I don't get to play as much. I'm waiting for my daughter to grow up a little bit more so we can start playing.
We've got to ask just real quick before we forget. We've got to ask the real big question of the podcast.
Yeah, correct? Have you played Cyberpunk 2077?
No. But I watched my brother-in-law play it.
Well, so one of the ongoing jokes in that game, you get to have a romantic relationship with one of two characters. One of them is Pan Am. She's kind of like a Los Angeles vehicle gypsy of some sort, and then the other one is Judy, who is this artsy kind of like visual artist. She makes like 3D brain movies and stuff. Either way, me and Fisto disagree on which one's the better of the two. I'm a Judy guy. Fisto is a Panem guy. Everybody on the list that comes on the podcast tells us one of the two, and I'm usually in the minority, but I've got more, I have more advanced taste than everybody else, but whatever. But anyways, that's our
I fully admit that standing on waifu with a raifu is incredibly, just like peasant morality, but I'm fine with it because waifu with a raifu, so it's whatever.
Okay.
I mean, I was about to say like I didn't know we were going to descend into a best girl argument. I should have come more prepared.
No, it happens.
But since I don't have an answer for you, I'll try to give a brief offering, which is I don't think that it's a peasant morality, because I think that, and I'd love to talk about this sometime in some medium, which is that I think the anime fixation actually tells us a lot about what's going on with the culture, because since the sexual revolution, the whole concept of the female has been like torn apart and ground into the ground and ruined and is now unrecognizable. And so I think that the idea of like these arguments about best girl and these waifu conversations, I think they reveal a deep need for the archetypal female, the idealized female, not just physically, but morally, and what she stands for. And I just wonder about the sort of Theotokos shaped hole in everybody's hearts that is yearning for that.
Thank you, Dr. Zach. You have actually you elevated our discussion to the highest level possible, because it's you're absolutely right, because there is a lack of that in media, and there's a confusion on what a woman should be or how we should look at women and how we should approach women. And if it's interesting because these two characters, right? One is a very vulnerable, victim-like kind of character that is kind of rescuable, I guess you can look at her, but artistic, frail, sensitive, very feminine. Ironically, she's actually a lesbian, but she's very feminine and girly. And the other one is kind of like a badass. She's like a sniper. She's a mechanic. She's part of like a biker gang type of situation.
Brings surface to air missiles with her whenever, just in case. Because you never know when you might need one of those, right?
She's loyal. She's absolutely loyal, and she's ride or die, you know? And it's interesting because they are very, this spiritual dichotomy of the woman in the modern gamer mind. So, yeah, I guess it is an actual intellectual debate that we have on this podcast, Fisto, that we've gone over for 2 years.
It finally happened. I'm so excited. It finally happened.
But jokes aside, go ahead.
I think it's good. I think you should have this kind of conversation. I'm a big believer in that art. The poet in every age is like the artist. The artist knows what's going on at the level of types and images in a way that is accessible to everyone with or without, having read all these stupid academic books. And so when I know, and I've been thinking a lot about the prevalence of anime in my own life. I could admit a lot of things to you about the amount of anime my wife and I have watched, and in the greater culture at large, especially among younger people. So that's a good conversation. You should keep having it.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think that there's a type of Christian, for example, that once they convert or they become part of a church, whether it's Protestantism or whatever, they become completely terrified of the secular, and they're like, "Oh, we're not gonna watch this. Harry Potter is evil. It's got magic in it, and that type of thing." Which I think that itself is a very secular way of approaching things, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And we have to engage with the mainstream in a way. We have to be part of. Intellectually we do have to be separate, right? But we still need to be part of the mainstream because we're not going to do anybody any favors if we sit there and go, "Oh no, you got to turn off that Harry Potter satanic stuff there, boy," and that kind of, and like become the what's his name on the Ned Flanders like caricature,
Yes, that's right.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's a tough one, especially being a father myself. It's like, what do I let my daughter watch? What do I watch with my daughter? What's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and I need to make sure I know all these things because I need to be able to properly engage with them so I can properly engage with her when she is exposed to them inadvertently and all that kind of stuff without being kind of a dullard when it comes to things, because I
yeah.
Well, my wife go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, doctor.
I was just gonna say, I think you're right about it being secular because, like, when you say we're gonna reject this thing wholesale, it's completely bad. It's the other side of the utopian dream. Like, oh, we can make this thing that's completely good. Therefore, there's this other thing that's completely bad. There's no part in it, and that's not a Christian reaction. The Christian reaction is everything good belongs to Christ because Christ is the good. And so what was so helpful for me with media, because you're talking about your daughter, is my dad watched everything with us. And he was kind of like this amateur film critic, and he would explain everything, and he would talk about why this is good and why this is bad, not just from an artistry perspective, but from a moral perspective. That character did not experience redemption. He'd point this out to you. This is a bad movie because the hero wasn't redeemed or whatever. And so we watched a lot of stuff that I don't know if I necessarily would be like, yeah, that's a good thing to watch. But it was a good thing to watch because my dad watched it with us and he explained it to us and he sort of formed our moral imaginations while we were watching these things.
Right. That's wonderful because that's exactly how I was raised and that's how I'm trying to raise my daughter. Like we watched Jaws on Monday and she loved it. And, I had to stop and talk about like why this character was doing this and why this character was doing that. We watched Back to the Future last night. And she
Nice.
loved it. She was like, I love this movie. It's great. And I was like, well, this is why, he's doing this and this is why he's doing that. And this is why, and I explained all this stuff. And I think, we have, in a way, what's his name? That philosopher, media philosopher, Catholic guy. The medium is the message. What's his name?
Marshall McLuhan.
Marshall McLuhan, right? He talked about how, like, you can't just, go down into the abyss. You have to kind of go through it. And there's no avoiding the media world. You can't you can't hide away from it because it's going to drag you down. He uses that Edgar Allan Poe story where the guys on the brothers on the boat tie themselves to the boat as they enter the cyclone, and they get killed except for the brother that lets go, and he floats out and he grabs something, and he gets ejected out of the cyclone. And that's kind of how we have to approach it. We can't just hide away, because that's, in a way, we can't be Puritans, right? Because the Puritans ceased to be because of that. They try to shut themselves out and build utopia in New England, and it didn't work. It didn't work.
No.
All right. So before you go, another question we ask everybody is, what do you recommend, to listeners to read, for example? Like, are you reading anything interesting right now, or enjoying any media, or do you have any books you would like to recommend for us to add to our ever growing list of things to read? Besides your book, of course, because that's going to be a requirement to listen to this podcast.
I mean, I read a lot. I watch a lot of different things. Let's see. I mean, it always depends on what people are into, but I'm kind of always recommending the Lord of the Rings, and it's just, the Lord of the Rings is really a kind of a special gem, not because of its world building, because there are many authors that have come out who have had way more complicated worlds or whatever. That's not really the point. The point is that it really captures a totally sacramental religious way of viewing the world. Religion explicitly isn't mentioned anywhere in Tolkien's mythology at all, but if you look at it, everybody has a quote unquote religious perspective, in the sense that everything is sacramental. All the physical objects in the Lord of the Rings have moral content. Everything everyone does, everything everyone says, like all these beautiful things are always pouring out of people's mouths who become comic relief characters in the movies, but in the book it's just a different universe. That one I always recommend for that reason. And then C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, I think, is really, really underread. I think it's
strong agree.
Yeah, I gave a talk one time at Doxicon on the East Coast, in which I argued that the Space Trilogy was the greatest piece of science fiction ever written, because it understood the genre trappings of science fiction and challenged the fundamental assumptions in the science fiction genre, turned the whole thing on its head. And that challenge has never been answered by another writer, as far as I'm aware. And so I think those two would be my go-tos.
Okay. You're actually the second person to recommend the Space Trilogy. Just I was having dinner with my priest, actually, and we were talking about it, and he is a huge fan of the Space Trilogy, and he recommended I read it. And now it's two for two, so I think I'm going to pick it up.
Make me 3 for 3, buddy.
Okay. I know you talked about it too.
Yeah, it's on my list of reread. I'm going through Lord of the Rings again right now. And Space Trilogy is on the list. Especially the way he builds it up to the last book, that hideous strength. Phew! Man was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. Very cool. And I mean, it, like, Lewis is known for Chronicles of Narnia, and it's kind of like, oh, Chronicles of Narnia, yeah, all that. And then in Space Trilogy, it's holy this guy, bro. Like, Lewis is kind of his he's got this side of him that, like, it's like Screw Tape. What's in Screw Tape? But he just cuts loose, and you're like, bro, you're kind of messed up.
And
awesome.
My warning for, I agree with 100%. My warning for that hideous strength is that it's very much an English novel and has 20 plus characters in it that are all important. And it's like, it's twice, it's longer than the first two books combined. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And so I really recommend, if you read it once and you're like, I have no idea what just happened, like, read it again, because it rewards deeper readings.
Yeah.
It rewards multiple readings, and there's so much going on. It's a book
Yeah.
about marriage. It's a book about dystopia. It's a book about Arthurian legend. It references Tolkien's mythology.
Yeah.
It just the things that are going on in this book
It's
is so many.
it's C.S. Lewis' final boss.
All right, you guys
Let's be
sold
real.
me. I'm sold. Okay, I'm gonna pick it up today. I'm gonna get it on my Kindle today. But Hideous Strength is the last of the trilogy, correct?
Yes, yeah. Out of the
Yes.
Silent Planet is the first one. The second title escapes me. This is gonna
It's
bother me.
Paralandra.
Paralandra, that's right. Yes,
Okay.
Out of the Silent Planet. That man, it's just cool. It's from a different time of sci-fi, man. Where like, all it's not hard sci-fi at all, and that's what makes it great.
Well, so one of the things I do with my daughter is we read every night, and right now we just finished the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and we're gonna keep going through all the Narnia books. And I'm excited to read those because I read the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe when I was like in fourth grade, but I've never actually read anything beyond that. And it's so interesting because, my daughter, she's a catechumen herself, and she goes to the little kid classes, and it's such a wild thing how perceptive children can be towards religion, and how sometimes I'm like, oh, let me explain this deep concept, and she goes, no, I get it. And she like explains it better than I could. She's like 7 years old, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's actually better than I was going to explain it to you, But you talk about the Christian themes in like Narnia, and it's like it's such a great tool. One, it's enjoyable and it's a great story, but it's such a great tool to like kind of explain that. One interesting thing that my daughter kind of like had a hang up on was that they kept on getting called the daughters of Eve and sons of Adam, and I was like, no, it's because they're special. She's like, what do you mean they're special? Because they're humans. We're special. We're literally in the image and likeness of Christ. And she's like, oh. And I'm like, I see that. I see why that's important in that book, because when I read it when I was in like fourth grade, I didn't like that either for some reason. And that's because I was truly a secular person. And it's an interesting way, like it kind of makes you like it. I kind of recoil from it. And now I think about it, I recoil from it because by being a son of Adam there's a implication of responsibility. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's responsibility put upon us. You're not just a dude. You're the son of Adam. There's a responsibility that the children have a responsibility towards Narnia, and we have a responsibility towards Earth. And I don't know, it made me recoil when I first read it. And, when rereading it to her, I was like, huh, I see. Okay. There's like a duty implied there. But anyways, Dr. Zach, thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And I love your work. I love your book, and I love your podcast. For listeners, Dr. Zach's book, Journey to Reality, Sacramental Life in the Secular Age, is a fantastic book. You can read that. You don't have to be Orthodox. I think it's a great book, even if you are a Protestant or spiritual or, whatever. You can be an atheist and read it. I think it's still good because you understand kind of the perspective of a truly sacramental perspective on life. Also, Dr. Zach's podcast, The Roots of Everything, it's new. You can find it on YouTube, and you can get his Substack. You can follow him on Substack. If you want to listen to like the paid versions, I believe I got like 5-month-long freebie subscriptions. So if you guys want to leave it in the comments, I'll send you one of those free months to his behind the paywall episodes, which are actually really good. And I do recommend you get the book and subscribe to his podcast. And once again, Dr. Zach, thank you so much. Fisto, don't get stuck in Ohio for too long. I need you back in Florida.
I'll do my best.
And you're always welcome back, Dr. Zach. I would love to. We could probably talk for another like 6 hours or more.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
All right, it was an honor having you on. And listeners, good night. Please like, share, and subscribe and all that stuff I always say. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode because I sure did. Good night.